Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, November 5th, 2015. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. The A-Team is back in the studio today. We got Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com, the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post and SportsIllustrated.com, and of course, the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, also of MMAfighting.com. All right, guys, much to discuss, and let's start off this week with some potentially promising news. How about this? A positive story. Maybe. I want to get your take on that. Yesterday it was reported on UFC Tonight that there have been some serious talks between both Nick Diaz's legal team and the Nevada Athletic Commission to reduce his suspension, his 5-year suspension, to just 18 months, and also reduce his fine from $165,000 to $100,000. This is part of a settlement deal that could be announced in the next week or so. Now, here's the question. Obviously, 18-month versus 5 years, that's a downgrade, and 165 to 100 is a downgrade as well. That is obvious. But are they getting it right here? Can you live with this?
Doesn't matter what I can or can't live with.
Well, I mean, as someone, as we all have been talking about it.
I mean, look, if you're Nick Diaz's lawyer, what you're thinking about is what can we if we play the odds, what is likely to happen? If we go to court, what could happen? If they give us a certain verdict on one side and we go take it back to the Athletic Commission, what could happen? If these negotiations fail, what could happen? And so in that sense, I can understand why he's probably just playing the odds and saying, it's not that we couldn't get a better deal, but this is a good deal and this is a secure deal. And so in that sense, it feels like a prosecutor and a defense attorney sort of working out something where the punishment is less. You can live with it. You have to admit things that you don't want to admit. I've been watching too much Law and Order, I guess. But here's what I would say. There's just a part of me that's like, this is so completely outrageous. They can't prove he did anything. They just can't. They can't prove he did anything, or at least not beyond some sort of either reasonable doubt or a degree of, which is for criminal trials, before a civil trial, just a sort of a general probability's sake. And so it's like, I understand the real life mechanics of all this, but a big part of me is just like, oh my God, like what do we have to do before we say this still seems a gross misjustice, and on top of that, it still doesn't really reform any kind of issue with the commission in terms of future marijuana cases and how they handle it. So I can live with it, but it's not awesome.
And Jeff, important to note that the suspension would essentially start January 31st of this past year, so that would mean that he would be free, if this comes to pass, he would be free to fight July 31st of next year. Right. Your thoughts?
Well, it's good to see that he would be coming back sooner than we thought, but it does leave a bad taste in my mouth because like a lot of us here, I think that I believe that he didn't deserve any kind of a penalty at all. The thing is, the Nevada Commission is not going to just lie down and roll over for everybody and just say, well, we're going to just take away everything. They need something. They want something to show for it. They want to be able to say, to save face, or as I said last week, save clown face, because that is what they do. But they want something. And so it's up to Diaz and his team now to say, okay, we're gonna give them something. We're gonna be able to come back by July. The $100,000, maybe they can continue to negotiate that down to the point where there's very little money involved and they just have to be out till July or something like that. But the fact that the NAC is negotiating a 5-year suspension down to 18 months tells me that they don't have a lot of confidence that when this thing goes to court, they were going to prevail. And so, I know, again, this is all in negotiation, and you were the one that reported this, and I don't know how close to being finalized this whole thing is, but it seems to me that the NSC is operating on a slippery slope and trying to hold on to something.
So do you think that they should roll the dice? Diaz's team should roll the dice and actually challenge this in court?
Look, I mean, I'm not. That's a big thing for any of us to speculate on. I do think that they are in the right here, but I'm not a lawyer, and I also think that the fact that the NAC has gone from 5 years to 18 months leads me to believe that I don't think they're succumbing to public pressure. I kept hearing people talk about how, people were signing petitions and the public pressure. They don't care what the public thinks. They're going to do what they want to do. But the fact that they might have seen the writing on the wall saying, we may not win this case, and so we'll see what we can salvage. I don't know whether I would tell Nick Diaz to roll the dice. I mean, He may. I wouldn't want to pay a $100,000 fine. I'll tell you that much.
Well, I feel like I'm going to sort of go with Nick Diaz. It seemed like he was optimistic about what's going on. So I think that when you look at it comparatively, like where it was at and where it's at now, you have to say, well, that probably looks pretty good to him and his team. If he can fight 9 months from now, well, it's not as big of a hit. He was getting hit from both ends. He wasn't going to be able to make the money fighting, and he was getting with $165,000. Now it's $100,000, which is still not fair, but at least he can start making money again before long if this thing happens. So it's bizarre because it was so far off to begin with. I guess that's where you start. Like you said, there shouldn't have been. There was no proof. There was no way it should have ever been where it's at. So you're compromising a huge deal if you're his team, but. Since I'm sort of getting the sense that the team sort of looks at this like, well, this is good though. I mean, this is good, and I guess I sort of have to look at it like that too, because at least his livelihood is salvaged for now. If that's the case, if he can return, at least he can still fight and he can make money. And honestly, it's not a popular stand, but you would like Nick Diaz to, you want him to actually take it seriously too this time through. I love Nick Diaz. We've been through how many, his innocence and all of him being a real fighter, a guy that you really like in that sense. But I hope that he's able to sort of manage himself a little better in that sense. I hope he doesn't get it.
He managed himself just
True.
fine.
No, he did 100%. But I mean, just in general, like it goes back. He was, he wanted.
DUIs, I think, is a bigger issue.
Absolutely. I'm saying all of the whole package. You just hope that he's able to sort of, use this a little bit to get a new lease on things.
And I just wanted to add, you mentioned that you don't think that they are succumbing to public pressure. I actually view this the opposite light. Last week, they gave Rousimar Palhares what I believed was a much more lenient fine suspension than we were all expecting. And the fact that they're even talking about this a month and a half later, to me, and oh, by the way, Francisco Aguilar is out as chairman, which you could believe in coincidences or not, but I mean, the timing is somewhat suspect. I actually feel like they are feeling the heat, and this is their way of telling us all right, we may have overstepped our boundaries here.
You may be right. I don't know. Call me naive, but I just believe in the power of arrogance, and I believe that they're not going to take anybody else's perspective into play.
Again, but the only solace I really cannot take is. To your point again, to me the DUI is that's a real big problem, right? Getting behind the wheel drunk. There are plenty of studies to show that getting behind the wheel of a car high on marijuana, while highly inadvisable, is not as reckless as doing so with alcohol. But be that as it may, I don't want to get into that debate. I guess the larger point I have is, can they still answer the question, do you have a mechanism to enforce the in versus out of competition window use as it relates to marijuana, not just for Nick Diaz, for any athlete that comes before you for licensing? And the answer to that is unequivocally, we do not. And so as long Nick Diaz has a good lawyers, and maybe they realize, look, we can go to trial, but it may cost you more, and you might not get so just take what you can get. Okay, I get it, but there's a lot of other fighters who do not have that justice, who do not have the means to that justice, and that to me is still very concerning.
Great point there, because I wholeheartedly believe he deserves zero punishment. He should be able to fight next week in Melbourne, in my opinion. However, it would cost Nick a lot more money if they take this to court. That's the one part that I think people forget in all this. Like, he's suffering, and no money is coming in. He may be doing seminars and whatnot, but his real living comes from fighting. So that's definitely something to consider. When you weigh, is it better to fight this in court or just take this settlement if it is in fact 18 months?
No, and also Luke broadens out to other fighters in terms of how the regulations impact other fighters. I'll also broaden it out to other fighters in terms of how the NAC is addressing what we would all consider a miscarriage of justice. They're relaxing if these negotiations come to fruition. They're relaxing a 5-year fine down to 18 months. But think about other situations that the NAC has been involved in, and the ones that are going to be happening in the future, where people are not going to, we're going to get a fine and they're going to immediately start looking for something lesser, or people who who already have had situations that the NAC has just totally fouled things up, like John Jones, for example, with a cocaine test that he shouldn't even been tested for cocaine. And now, what do we talk about with John Jones? We always talk about his cocaine habit, which we shouldn't even know about. But the NAC is the ones that essentially created that entire public image for him. So we're going to start seeing, if this happens, we're going to start seeing more fighters standing up for themselves and standing against the NAC.
I wish there were, just last thing, I wish there were like a rich billionaire who would front Nick a bunch of money. So they could go into that negotiation and he could pull like a Godfather and be like, what is your offer? And Nick could be like, my offer is nothing. I would love that. But alas, we live in the real world.
And this is going to sound incredibly self-serving, and it probably is. But for a guy who's had such a contentious relationship with the media throughout his entire career, I mean, at times, it got a little heated there. I mean, for me, he even sort of insinuated that if I walked
more
into
so
his hood,
just you than the rest of us.
He comes from people get
some of
slapped
it,
back.
exactly. Isn't it a beautiful thing that, the media, for the most part, whether you agree with his antics or not, his fighting style or not, the way he conducts himself in public or not, the media, in large part, I think, stood up for what they believed was, injustice and spoke on his behalf when he couldn't say much. And I believe that all these articles and shows like this one and many other ones and the petition, all that, I think that actually helped. Like, I think that if we would have just been like, this sucks, man, but, on to UFC 193, I'm not 100% sure we'd be in this position right now.
And to me, it's just proof that it's like, look, I'm not saying the media doesn't make mistakes. We make mistakes every single day. We misinterpret things, or you hear things a certain way, or you just make even egregious mistakes sometimes. But like, this is sort of, the fighters should like take a note about this. We don't hate you. Like, you may do awesome things and we'll praise you. You may do bad things and we won't. So, but like this notion that there was any kind of vendetta against Diaz, I think got put to bed pretty quickly. Like, if we see something, we're going to say it, again, to the best of our abilities, but there's not this coordinated, bonfire to burn people in effigy. So I just want to make that note.
It's funny, 4 guys sitting in a studio in New York, we talk a whole lot about the state of Nevada on this show. It's like every week. It's almost like Nevada is sponsoring this show, like Nevada tourism.
We are banned from Nevada. At least I am. I don't know about everybody else.
Well, I mean, that's because of your gambling problem from back in the day. But I do feel like things are changing a little bit. With what happened with Paul Harris, good or not, it feels like they're taking their foot off the gas just a little bit, and that ego is coming down. So we'll see what happens. So we talk about Diaz. He will forever, in some ways, be linked to GSP. And here we have Freddie Roach telling Fight Hub TV, our partners over there, Marcos does a great job, that GSP is going to enter into a 6-week training camp to essentially see if he's fit to fight. And when you think about that comment from a guy like Freddie Roach, who never has a filter and in the past has dropped little nuggets here or there, who, he's often right about what he says with regards to George. And then when you think about what Faraz Zahabi has been saying, essentially from the get-go, that's his guy. And he says, yeah, I believe that George is fighting. I mean, George may be saying one thing, but 2 guys who know him pretty well, who are his coaches, confidants in some regard, are saying that. I mean, it's to me, and I want to get your take on this, it's not a matter of if now, it's when. That's the way I take this. I feel like now all signs are pointing to a return of George St. Pierre. Do you believe that as well?
Maybe so. Someone was asking me, like, how do you feel about it? Because I've sort of said I would like him to stay retired. And generally that's my preference. But, again, like, it doesn't matter what I want or believe. But I will say this, though. Like, if you had to think of a scenario where you'd say, okay, I don't want someone to come back, but they're going to. What would an ideal scenario look like that you could just stomach? Okay, a test camp to see if you still have it or not, which isn't scientific, but it's some kind of measurement to see if it's still there. I think it'll actually only really work in one direction. I think it'll only work towards re-energizing competitive juices. But okay, at least he's getting out there. If he gets injured in that camp, maybe he looks like, I don't really want to do it anymore. And then it looks like, from all indications, he wants one more fight. And it looks like he doesn't even want the belt. He wants some kind of a super fight. So if you're thinking about it, you're like, you know what? That's probably the best case scenario, because the beauty of GSP here, not quite literally, I suppose, but the beauty is that there's no impact whatsoever of this being for money. It's not for money. I mean, I'm sure the money would be nice.
Sure.
And he's probably happy to collect the check. He's not going to frame the check on his wall. I'm never going to cash that one. No, he's going to cash it. But the point being is, so many guys come back, well, I can make another check, and I know I can't do it. But this one feels like completely for competitive reasons. There's a purity to that I kind of enjoy. And so I guess on those circumstances, I have little to complain about.
Yeah, I mean, what we all have talked about how it would be great if GSP remained retired, but I think that we all kind of came at it from the perspective of, wasn't it amazing that the guy walked away with the championship belt? He wasn't, I won't say he was at the top of his game, because he got pretty beat up in that Johnny Hendricks fight, but in a sense he was still the champion. He walked away like that, and it's great when that can happen and the guy can walk away and walk off to the sunset at the top of his game. So coming back from that isn't as egregious as if it were someone like say Chuck Liddell at the end of his career when he was a shot fighter and he was getting knocked out and all that stuff. You don't want to see a guy come back when his game is really suffering. And I don't think that GSP's game was suffering. I mean, he certainly did get beat up by Hendricks, but his game wasn't really suffering. So I would say that if he's ready, if he's mentally ready, more power to him.
Do you agree with me though that this is not a matter of
100%.
if?
What did we talk about last
Yes,
time we had
you
a show?
picked it.
We said you were talking about who's going to fight first,
Crazy.
John Jones or George St. Pierre.
I still think you're wrong on that one.
Well, I could be wrong, but at least 1 week later here we are talking about a matter of when,
Yeah.
and I think that I really caught that realistically off of Faraz when he was on your show last week or 2 weeks ago. Just the enthusiasm, what he was saying about GSP, just wanting to, what you said in the spirit of the game, wanting to see if he could do that. It was more about the competition. So I thought, to me, the writing was on the wall that he was going to do this. So it's not really a surprise to me that he's going to do this. I like the way that he's approaching it because he walked away from the game because of the pressure surmounting upon him, all the things that were going on within the game itself that he wanted changed. The UFC has taken some measures to sort of meet those demands, I guess, if you want to look at it however, towards him or whatever, and just in general. But everything has sort of went the way that he kind of was hoping it would. And now he gets to do a camp where he doesn't have that pressure right now. He's just going to, I think he was one of those guys who internalized so much, obsessed over being the best, with guard against complacency, perhaps more than any fighter in the game. So I think that just having this camp without that sort of pressure, but just maybe with some, people know he's doing it, it's probably going to be good for him. Maybe he sees where he's at, but ultimately I think, like you said, he'll come back because he'll want to do it. He's going to come in probably a little bit less stressed because it's not about the belt. It sounds like he just wants that one fight. And it's fun to contemplate because honestly, I felt like as graceful as he kind of got out of it, he's doing it gracefully. Especially if it's just one fight, it's sort of a graceful return.
What a great point that is, because he really put out the blueprint, in my opinion, on how to leave but also not close the door. He never said the R word. He never wanted to say, this is not Brett Favre. And we may have been going back and forth and trying to read the tea leaves, but he's really done a great job of saying, look, I just need some time away. And if he comes back, he's not going back on his word, in my opinion. He's always told us that he might come back. Now, let me ask you, if it's not for the belt and it's just a big fight, is it Anderson or bust? Is there, I can't really think of any other super fight out there for him.
We kind of were talking about this a little bit on the train ride in. To me, that's the fight. That was the fight that was dangled out there for the last 5 years. You still have these guys who are the champions of their divisions for literally through 5 years together, and they were always that partition. Well, now you got a chance because he doesn't want to fight for the belt. He's not interested. Anderson Silva's floating in a sort of limbo space with Weidman having the belt. So it's sort of like, why not now? If they're going to do it, this would be the time. It really just comes down to GSP. I guess the things that you want to find out is you still want to be a welterweight? Is he open to doing middleweight?
Yeah.
If he's a middleweight, I would say that's the fight that you got to make.
I don't know. I think it depends whether CM Punk is ready.
Stop it.
Okay, just kidding.
Come on. This guy.
That's a sick burn there, Wagenheim.
Is it Anderson or bust?
That's all you had to say?
Yeah, that's it. That's all you got
That
to
was
say.
a wonderful
Show
contribution.
yourself out.
I don't know. I don't know who else you sort of rack your brain. There's be a bunch of fights that could sell, virtually anyone, but then you do want him to kill off welterweight contenders. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. His return sells in its own right.
Sure,
but it has to be special.
But you don't want to abuse it,
Sure.
and then once he leaves, he's created this mess because he wins or wins in some kind of way that damages the rest of the division. I don't think he wants to do it either. I guess it's Anderson, but the guy resisted it for so long for all these reasons that dealt with. Well, look at the size differential, and this is.
It's always been complicated with him. That's the problem.
He's always erected, I think, in many cases, fairly these obstacles why that fight should never happen. But again, at the time he was champion as well, and Anderson was a champion too. So there was a little bit, they're free from that responsibility. Plus, he's got a teammate, a larger teammate, in Chris Weidman, who's beaten Anderson twice, and Anderson is clearly I don't want to say a broken version of himself, but certainly a lesser version of himself, though at his peak anyway. So it's just there's a big part of me that got so used to him saying no, that I am still resistant to it. But then when you just sort of mathematically eliminate who it could be, there's no other obvious contender.
And if you're talking about a super fight, look at the welterweight division. He's either beaten the guys that would give him some semblance of a super fight, or there just really isn't the name. And even if you're talking about, let's just say Robbie Lawler is still there, and that's, he can get that fight. I guess that would be a big fight. It would then be involved in the belt. It would be a big fight, but it's just not the super fight thing. really only point, if that's really what it is, I know they're using that terminology, so I'm like, that really only points to somebody like Anderson Silva, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I just can't, when I think about the welterweight roster, I just can't come up with a name that would even fit that bill.
And it is important to note that he has never said he's not interested in the belt. That was kind of what Rory said in that Q&A. So let's see. Although Freddie Roach, who just saw him, I mean, we saw pictures of them together, and these other pictures of George, training with other people have been popping up. If Freddie says it, I believe it. So we got.
Freddie says lots of things.
What event is it going to be on?
It's got to be 200 now, right?
I just want to take a step back here. Freddie does say lots of things.
No. Freddie,
Yes, he does.
He's the man.
No, he is the man, but he says a
I
lot of crazy ass things.
I know. But I love him. I can't say
No, I love him too, but like he definitely has a little bit of that old man. I'm just gonna like fart in the room and then leave. He's got a lot of that going on in him too.
It is important to note as well that I feel like Freddie has gotten a lot of credit for George's success because he would show up from time to time and people love to hang their hat on his stature, which I think is unfair to Faraz Zahabi because like Freddie's never cornered George. I mean, he would just show up, sort of in the off, off training.
Like your icon, Steven Seagal, a little bit here, but what you're talking
about.
Listen,
his name has been dragged through the mud.
He was great on South Park. I don't know if you saw Steven Seagal on South Park.
If it was anything mocking him, I have no interest.
It was very
it was very complimentary. All right, so we'll see what happens. I have a feeling we'll be talking about this story for many weeks to come. Now let's go from one guy who might be coming back to a guy who might, somewhat surprisingly, leave the sport at his peak. The undefeated Khabib Nurmagomedov. This time last week, we were talking about being so excited for that fight against Tony Ferguson.
I put the vex on that.
You did.
I should have never mentioned it.
And it was like 2 hours later, we find out that he has an injured rib, he's out of the fight, and now Edson Barbosa is fighting Tony Ferguson. But the bigger story here is that on Instagram, when he confirmed the news, he put out, I'm not even sure if I'm ever going to come back. And in talking to some members of his management team, Dominance MMA, they're saying, yeah, this is accurate. Like he's actually contemplating never fighting again. It's just building up too much. I mean, he's been dealing with a string of injuries. He hasn't fought since April of 2014, and this kind of blew me away. This is Khabib Nurmagomedov, who's come across as this ultra confident, somewhat cocky fighter, undefeated. He's just a raw, hungry guy. I mean, what at this stage you're going to walk away? I mean, you don't want to criticize him. He's got to do what he's got to do, and who knows how serious these injuries are and how they're affecting him. But I would be floored if we never saw him fight again. What do you make of this?
Well, I think that him saying that in the immediate aftermath of the injury, I would say that makes some sense. I mean, a person has been out because of injury and now gets injured again. Yeah, there's a certain fatalism to that, to just the feeling of that, and so it doesn't surprise me that he would have expressed that emotion in the immediate aftermath. Now, the fact that some of his team members are also saying the same thing and are presumably are saying these things based upon subsequent conversations, not just in that moment. That does concern a little bit, but I think we do need to step back. This is not. Dominic Cruz's ACL, or this is not, not to diminish the rib injury at all. You can't even breathe with one of those things. But it is not an injury. It is an injury that once it heals, it's healed.
Sure.
And so when he takes the time to heal that rib, he should be able to be the same fighter that he was before he injured it. And so he's not to worry about his.
But let's not forget, he did have 2 serious knee injuries
recently. Right. But that guy who recovered from those knee injuries was presumably ready to fight, and then he hurts his ribs. So he's going to go back to that place. And if that guy is good enough to go out there and schedule a fight against a guy of the quality of Tony Ferguson, I would think he's going to come back and get back in the game. At least I would hope so.
You mentioned Dominic Cruz, and to me, one of the marvels of Dominic Cruz throughout this whole thing has been that he's put in so much effort of recovery to try to get to the point where he could train again to fight. And then these setbacks, it's almost a marvel to look back and think how futile that effort must seem. And you see a guy like him, like Khabib, who's now in a similar position where he's recovering, and then he gets hurt again, and he has a fight on the horizon, it gets canceled. You can see why he would be very frustrated by this. Even given his demeanor, he wants to compete. I get the sense that this is a guy who loves the fight game. He loves being a part of it. And just to have that thing the rug keep coming out from him. I think it was emotions really coming out. I can't imagine him walking away at this point, not as dominant as he has been and not as close as he's been to a title shot. But it's an unfortunate thing about the fight game in general, is just that this happens to certain guys. I mean, you just had TJ Grant on your show, and here's a guy who was right there ready for a title shot, and then he gets the concussion issues, and then it just goes on, and pretty soon what happened to TJ Grant? It's a crazy sport that way, and you can't ensure that these guys aren't going to get hurt. And it's just, I think he's had it, like they were saying, it wasn't sparring hard, nothing like that. It was just sort of a freak thing, and I feel like that's just going to have to be the thing. But I think ultimately, when it comes down to it, when he kind of gets things under control and rethinks about it, I think he'll still fight again. I think that's just who he is. And given 22-0 and so near the title shot, I can't imagine that would actually be it.
But look at Cruz, though. I mean, even despite all the setbacks, he's always managed to keep his eye on the prize. I don't think I can recall a time where he's ever given any kind of indication that he could be done.
No.
And he's always had that, I'm healing this, and then I'm going there.
He went a little more silent during in the immediate aftermath.
But there's never
of
been a
his
story
injuries.
of like, I thought about retirement.
True.
He's always been
That's true.
very steadfast that he was going to come back. And man, how mentally tough is, and not to say that Khabib isn't mentally tough, but this guy, Dominic Cruz, to continue to come back from all this, I do agree. I feel like he's probably very emotional right now, and it has to be, such a strain, to put it mildly, on your brain to just go through all these setbacks over and over again. I just feel like it would be a tremendous travesty if at this point we never see him fight again.
Well, it'd be terrible for the lightweight division, because I was thinking about this the other day. Like, I talked to Daniel Cormier about Nurmagomedov, and I don't know if he meant in all the guys ever, including wrestling, but he was telling me, like, in the clinch, there's no one better than him, period. Independent of weight class. He's like, that dude's ability in the clinch is unparalleled. I wish I had the text, I could read it. He almost was laughing as he was writing it. Like he goes, you can't believe how good he is. And to me, like, I don't think he has the same, like, virtuosity of guard play that Rafael dos Anjos has, but I've said this before, and I will maintain this. He is the most complete grappler in MMA. Period. He has a better array of takedowns. He has rides from turtle. He has guard passes. He has back takes. He has such an array that you do not see at this level of the game. People just don't have it, and he does in a way that is utterly spectacular. I want to make a note about the nature of his injury, because this was really sort of not funny to me, but like. So I don't know the extent of it, but I believe it's a broken rib. That's what he wrote on social media, was a broken rib. Let's assume it is a broken rib. Part of the emotions that you guys are discussing is probably driven by the fact that a broken rib is extraordinarily painful. If you've ever seen someone with a broken rib, they can't even do this. They can't even expand their chest and breathe because it is so devastatingly painful. And I know there are a lot of fans out there that like to take their medical cues, God bless him, from Dr. McGregor. I do not recommend that. I understand why he says that about Jose Aldo. He's in that competition framework. A rib injury is not the same as an ACL tear, in the sense that an ACL tear can impact your athletic ability over the long run. A broken rib you can heal from. But a broken rib is, Dominic Cruz dealt with pain, but he mostly dealt with regaining physical ability, and there's incremental progress. With a broken rib, it is so GD painful that it leaves you can't move. You have to just kind of let the thing heal on its own. That can influence someone who's already kind of having some issues, maybe about like, I got to get back there. So I just want to point out, I can't believe we have to have this discussion, but it's illustrative that someone as, I'm talking tough as nails, as Nurmagomedov, is saying, I can't deal with this anymore, in part, many issues of course, but in part because the severity of the injury. These guys, their vitality is how they identify themselves. And when that is compromised, they begin to question who they are. A broken rib will break you down to the ground.
And I also think that we need to file this away, this statement, even though we were talking about, well, this was made in the immediate aftermath of being injured and having to drop out of a fight, so he might just be frustrated. But it does represent some semblance of a crack in the armor. When you bring any degree of self-doubt into the equation, and as we know, fighting is a highly mental sport. It's not just being able to throw punches and get takedowns and all the physical skills that are involved. It's really about self-belief, and so that this has been introduced into Khabib's psyche could be significant going forward. He could come back and there could be some residual effect in his mental game from this. It's possible. not his physical game.
Yeah.
It's probably, I mean, I'm not a fighter, but you see these guys go through it. I feel like he's one of those guys who's been on the bowstring, ready to let go. He wanted to get in the media. I think he really wanted to be that guy that he's a foreign fighter, he's learning English, he was doing all these things. I really believe he was foreseeing himself already somewhere, or either with the belt right now or just a bigger star right now. And these injuries just keep happening. And imagine that sort of, you've got your horizon. It's right there, and once you get there, it's going to be everything you think, and then it just keeps slipping away from you. I just think that, I know it's like all the pain and all that too, but it's like just imagine the mental strain on that, the frustration of getting close to it and then just falling back each time.
And he was building momentum.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you couldn't go onto any MMA site without bear wrestling references,
That's
and
what I mean.
and that has unfortunately substantially died down.
And also he's, we talk about we use the term uncrowned champion sometimes a little loosely, but he really fulfilled that. I mean, he was a guy in his last fight who beat, and not just beat, but beat pretty convincingly the guy who now wears the belt. And I know the UFC rankings don't allow somebody other than the champion to be the top guy, but you could legitimately have made a case before all the injuries sort of sidelined him. You could have made a case, certainly in the SI.com rankings, we had Khabib at number 1 and Dos Anjos at number 2 at one point. And I would defend that, even though he wasn't the guy with the belt. He was the guy that beat that guy. So
even still, he's one of those guys that you telegraph when you're seeing him. I know you've been a big fan of his coming up. I'm like, from the earliest fights in the UFC, you're like, that's a future champion. I mean, you just like John Jones. When he was coming up, you're like, that's a future champion. You knew it.
When you see this, this dude with an Amish beard, and you don't know much about him, and then you saw the way he literally handled Abel Trujillo.
Yeah.
I was like, what? How is that possible? Just an expert at every. Abel Trujillo, I think, survived the bout, but could do nothing to him. He doesn't come around with a hulking physique. He doesn't really mean mug you. Like I said, if you saw him on the street, you'd call him Jedediah because of the beard. And then he just goes in there and will wreck you. It's incredible. And to lose a prodigious talent like that would be a real shame.
And I must say, and I know I harp on this way too much, but when this news came out, the tweets celebrating his injury and his apparent demise, at least for now, just
celebrating?
Well, people were like, oh, yeah, of course. People were saying like, oh, it serves him right. That's karma. Because Khabib he's been cocky and he's taken shots at people like Anthony Pettis. I saw the majority were just tweets saying like good riddance, essentially. To me, it's just such poor taste, and hopefully he doesn't see any of that stuff.
I wonder why fighters lash out on Twitter. I have no idea. I can't piece it together.
All right, let's move along. Let's talk about Miesha Tate. Speaking of lashing out, she has been pretty vocal over the past week or so. It started with an interview on ESPN.com with Brett Okamoto. She's an unhappy camper, and that's putting it mildly. And you can make a very strong case that she has every right to be. We've talked about this, the way that announcement was handled on Good Morning America, where Ronda Rousey, was it Good Morning America? Yeah, it was GMA. I thought it was Today Show. I get those confused sometimes. She came out and announced that she'll be fighting Holly Holm, and no one told Miesha about this. She thought that she was getting the next title shot. She just beat Jessica Ai. It was said on the record that she's getting that title shot, and it's interesting because I brought up this story to her on Monday. Miesha Tate is 100% a team player. She is a company woman. I remember reaching out to her one time to anonymously confirm a story regarding her upcoming fight against Rin Nakai, and she said, it is not part of my job description to confirm this even anonymously. And I was like, damn, that is a loyal soldier. And then for this to happen to her now, it's like, it probably happened to the wrong woman. She maybe would have been very upset, but she probably would have kept the secret. She strikes me as that kind of person. Anyhow, she's now saying that she's contemplating retirement because if she doesn't make the kind of money that Ronda's making, but in her mind is fighting tougher opponents, what's the point? And I think you can make the case that, well, getting those checks, regardless of how big they are, and you wouldn't be getting those anymore, well, that's the point in its own right. But people want to fight for the belt, they want to get that belt, I get it. What do you make of her comments? Does she have a point? Should she still be upset at the UFC? Should she contemplate retirement at this point? Do you feel like she's, just publicly negotiating with them right now? There's a lot to unpack here, and I'm really curious to see how it all plays out. What do you guys make of it?
Yeah, someone tweeted me, they were like, why isn't she addressing these issues in private? I'm like, I don't think you know how this works.
Yeah.
So, is she negotiating in public? I don't know how you could divorce that out of the equation. That seems to be very clearly what's going on here.
Is that smart?
I don't know, man. Like, you always think there's going to be backlash, and then every time someone, we keep coming on the show, squeaky wheel gets the grease. Tim Kennedy's like, UFC, I can make more as a garbage man. Here's your #1 contender fight. Like, it's just the craziest thing in the world. So, you know, I think it's a complicated process, but in the end, I do think there is at least some merit to the idea of raising a stink. Okay, how far and how wide, I don't know, but generally speaking, it's pretty good. The one thing that bothers me a little bit about this is that she's like, well, I'm fighting tough. You know, there's always these Ronda comparisons. I don't like those for a lot of reasons. Ronda is just her own thing at this point, really. Like, you know, the people in other sports media, in hockey media, in whatever, any kind of media, entertainment media, they've latched onto her and they've made her something special. She got on a rocket ship and she left. I kind of feel like, you know. And so, for me, it's more of a question about, you know, is Miesha financially maximizing her potential? And I think that, to me, is a better way to frame what's going on. Because if you compare anyone to Ronda, it's automatically going to look like, oh my God, you don't make as much as her, and you took her the furthest. But that's not really a meaningful comparison. Retirement, I don't know. But what I can say is, you keep seeing this over and over. To your point you're talking about. Look, I'm not here to say that that any promoter, some promoters have been dishonest brokers. Don King has been a dishonest promoter, right? I'm not comparing UFC to that. But I guess what I am telling you is, like, sometimes you see these fighters, they form allegiances with the promotion, like Chuck Liddell and Matt Hughes, and they have these very fruitful, long-lasting relationships. But those are very rare and hard to establish, and a lot of those were crystallized in the age when they were really doing the UFC a solid. Miesha Tate, I don't think, is maximizing her financial value. And she is valuable to the UFC. But she doesn't occupy this interesting space where, wow, she can really do them a big, big favor. And so I'm not saying she's overplaying her hand, but in saying, I'm going to be your best friend, I don't know that's your smartest play. I think your smartest play is, again, collectively looking around and saying, all of us together, me at the front of that pack, but all of us together have some might. But the comparisons to Ronda, I don't like. And I think this shows some people can be friends with the UFC and they can go, look at Ronda, perfect. Look at Conor, perfect. Those things work out. But unless you're that level, you got to find another way to work an angle.
Interesting.
I agree with some of what you're saying, but I think that Miesha bringing Ronda into the equation actually is what she should be doing. I think it's a good thing because you were talking about Miesha Tate being a company woman, and I think that's, as you said, that can work for some people. It worked for Liddell, it worked for Hughes, but it's just not the way to go. I mean, the UFC is going to, you know, what's the reciprocal of being a company woman? It's gonna be a fighters organization. They're gonna embrace you as long as they can use you. They embrace Conor McGregor not because of all the things he said, but because he generated lots of money. They're embracing Ronda Rousey not because they like her. They're doing it because she makes a ton of money for them. And I think Miesha Tate is in a situation where she is fighting tougher people than Ronda Rousey. That is a fact. Ronda Rousey has been fighting. What was Beshka Hay was like maybe the number 10 person in the rankings when she was scheduled for that fight. I think Holly Holm was number 9 when she was scheduled for her fight. You know, it's just a fact. The UFC is taking what the women's bantamweight belt and making it a spectacle. They're essentially doing the same thing with Ronda Rousey that Bellator would do with like a Kimbo Slice, just finding the spectacle fights, and they're not making it the most competitive. If we compare
that's a little strong.
If we compare this to other sports, we're not saying, you know, that in other sports. We just had the World Series. The team that won the ALCS played the team that won the NLCS, and they played in the World Series. Wow, that's amazing. Those are the teams that earn their spot there. You know, Holly Holm, you know, bless her, but she has not risen to the point where she deserves a spot opposite Ronda Rousey in the cage. Miesha Tate has had that spot twice, lost both times. So yeah, it may not be the big selling fight, but she's gone back there and done what you're supposed to do to earn your spot back. She was given that spot publicly by the president of the company on television, and then it was pulled away from her. So I think that this was a really good lesson for her to see that you can't just do anything that the company wants. You are an independent contractor. We hear that term bandied about all the time with the UFC, and you got to act like one.
Well, I think that I can see Miesha's point and everything that she said. Essentially, like, she's right. You know, like she was told she was going to be next. Now she's not. She's essentially been, like she mentioned, relegated to a gatekeeper status. And that's probably a hard pill to swallow, considering a number of reasons, not just financial, but just if you go back and you look at Ronda's rise, Miesha has always been sort of tied to her in one way or another. They've been sort of cobbled along. You mentioned that she sort of got on a rocket ship and left. That's the thing that I think Miesha's, hasn't come to grips with. It's like Miesha, Ronda's now somewhere else. Like, she's at a star level, and now Miesha's
But not
been
just among the women.
Right,
everyone.
of course. And I think Miesha has been sort of tied to her through this whole process, and now suddenly she's here and Ronda's here, and that gap to her seems impossible to close. And that's probably where it's that sort of frustration becomes like part of her retirement process, like her thought, because you're like, well, if I can't get back to her, if I have to fight the harder people to get to her again, you could see why that would be frustrating. But ultimately, like you mentioned before, I mean, I think I do think she's sort of negotiating out loud. I think she's a pretty smart person. She knows what she's doing. She's been in the limelight for a long time, too, going back to Strikeforce, and she's always handled herself well. So I think she's probably just posturing a little bit to get into some better situation for herself. But ultimately, if Dana White and the UFC hasn't really helped themselves with Miesha Tate, just the way they sort of handled it by saying that it's there, and then going and publicly saying, like, she needs to fight some more before she gets there. I mean, that's, without being talked to directly, I mean, that's probably a rare slap in your face. That's got to hurt, So I think there's probably some emotion there too and some frustration. But ultimately, given the division that she's in, I think Miesha Tate will realize at some point, probably if she fought Nunes, for instance, a win there, you really can't. I mean, it would be hard to deny that she shouldn't get that shot again.
Also, I don't know if this is a wave or if this is just sort of anecdotally coming up, but I feel like there's a lot of young fighters verbally articulating concerns about retiring early. I mean, you got Brendan Schaub, you had TJ Grant on your show, Ian McCall, now Miesha Tate, and you can go on from there. This is just off the top of my head. And you had, what was his face, the milk guy from Bellator who left early, Conrad.
Yes, the milk guy. Jordan Meehan just retired.
Jordan Meehan, right. You're seeing a little bit, but it's not just finances, it's injuries too.
Yeah.
Injuries are maybe just as big, if not bigger. But I just feel like, I don't think that's necessarily the central issue to Miesha, although money obviously could be better. But I just want to point out tangentially, there is a relationship between what she's saying, and again, I don't want to overstate a wider trend, but I do feel like on some level we are hearing these people being like, if I'm not going to make big bank, what the hell am I doing?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great point. And by the way, to me it always feels weird talking about purses and salaries because we really don't know who's making what. Like, she said she never made
for the last Fox fight.
Yeah.
She didn't make after expenses, I believe, any more than $150K.
And I believe her. I mean, I'm not calling her a liar. All I'm saying is that if you actually sit down and study the UFC roster, you can make a very strong case that Miesha Tate is one of the 10 most popular fighters in the UFC.
She has over 1 million likes on Facebook.
Yeah, you look at her Facebook, her Instagram, her Twitter, and then just the reaction she gets when she's at a media day, like an open workout in Chicago. Her reaction was way bigger than TJ Dillashaw, the champion. At the weigh-in, way bigger than anyone on that card, just in her last fight. So she is a draw. And you hope that they can figure it out because she's not even 30 yet.
Really?
Yeah, she's not even 30 yet, so she's got a lot more fighting left in her. Okay, let's move along. Let's talk about Bellator. Bellator is back on Friday. It's one of their quote-unquote tentpole events, and I would say since Scott Coker took over, it's probably the least sexiest tentpole, if that even makes any sense. It doesn't have your sort of easy draw like Kimbo or a Dynamite show.
It has real fights on it, right?
It actually for that's the thing. But I'm saying it's funny in that sense. But for like the hardcore fans who don't like the new direction of Bellator, there's some solid fights on this card with some very good fighters. In non-title fights like Michael Chandler, and I'm not going to talk about Bobby Lashley versus James Thompson, but you got 2 title fights with 4 great fighters on it. But it got a little weird yesterday in St. Louis when Will Brooks...
Bellator stays weird.
Yes.
In a good way.
But here's the thing. So there was an altercation. We don't know who started it. Some people say it was the Pitbull brothers, some Will Brooks, but there was an altercation. And this has been brewing for quite some time via Twitter. And it apparently all erupted yesterday at the hotel. Is this a good thing for Bellator in the weird world of Bellator where we hold them to a different standard? That's clear. Is this a good thing for Bellator? And it appears, at least right now, Thursday afternoon, this was caught on camera and they're not going to put it out there. Is that smart? for Bellator.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's what I've been told from multiple people.
That's interesting. Wow, I would love to see that. I would say this, man. This is the most publicity this card's gotten.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's fair or that's awesome, but it's kind of the facts, right? I feel like this controversy has done what Usman Palhares does for World Series of Fighting. Like, were he not cranking Kimura's way past when he's supposed to, it would be sort of like a ho-hum kind of event. For me, this event is kind of interesting because I think there's a lot going on, which is to say, Scott Coker's been getting, Bellator generally, the brand, has been getting hounded by Patricio Freire. I should be headlining a big show. And they let him headline one of the Friday night shows. I know this is on Friday night, but like a regular Friday night show. And I think they were finally like, okay, all right, fine. Because every interview I was at the Bellator show where Kimbo fought Ken. Remember, Patricio was going to fight Daniel Weichel on that card. And every single interview he did with everyone, with Pitbull, was like, I'm not on the poster. At Double Workout, he pitched a fit publicly with Bellator officials sitting right there, like, how come I'm not on the poster? I'm not on this poster. Why am I not on the poster? This is bull ass, blah, 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 blah. Like, he was kind of enraged, and they were like, so, Pitbull, the way that works is there are many posters.
Yeah.
You're just on this one.
Sounds a lot like Will Brooks.
Yeah. And then you have Will Brooks. Will Brooks going out there and saying things like, how come it's the Kimbo's getting pushed? How come it's the Tito's getting pushed? I think at one point, Scott Coker can look to the hardcore consumer and say, look at the quality on this card, because as you mentioned, it's legitimate. And he can also look to the guys who've been bitching the most and say, okay, here you go. You wanted your top spot, you got it. You wanted more promotion, you were the co-main event on this one against a very good, credible contender. Now, pull your weight. Because if they don't pull their weight, if the ratings are kind of, then they have license to do whatever they want.
Are you saying they conspired to do this together?
It's not a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy because I think I think he's doing it because he felt like he owed him and it was the right thing to do. But I also think in the back of his mind, he's probably saying, if this doesn't work out, I can easily use this as leverage to not have to deal with this in the media anymore, and we could talk about other things.
Coker?
Yes.
But are you saying that the Pitbull brothers and Will Brooks came together to build
no,
interest?
no. I don't mean that.
Okay.
I mean, those guys are just...
You believe that?
Real quick, I was on that conference call. I don't think it's conspiracy at all. I think they hate each other's guts.
Yeah, no, I do think they don't like it. The funniest thing for me about this is that, and I'm wondering if people are going to tune in to the fights expecting that it's going to be Brooks against one of the Pitbulls. But I think that people don't realize that these are not even guys who are fighting each other. That's the...
They're not even in the same weight class.
Yeah.
Right. But it's just that's the real deep humor here for me. That this you got, of course, the famous John Jones and Daniel Cormier thing at the press conference. And these are guys, and we always see things where something gets a little bit testy between guys who are ready to compete against each other. These guys are not fighting each other, not in the same weight class. They're only one weight class away, and I wouldn't be surprised if the next 10 poll has a.
Well, there's a brother that can fight Will Brooks, right?
Well,
but you gotta make it Patricio.
Yeah, you gotta come on.
Okay. So here's the thing: if this is in fact, on camera somewhere on someone's phone or hard drive, as I've been told it is, to a degree, I don't know if the entire thing is there. It would be a little weird, and maybe they filmed it.
Wasn't this taped by the Bellator PR team for the big premiere?
Okay, so here we are, almost 24 hours away before. It hasn't seen the light of day, and as of right now, I'm told it won't. Is that smart?
It's definitely suspicious, gentlemen. I don't know. See, I hate these sort of conspiracy type things, but sometimes you look at it and you're like, well, this is almost like a forensic files. You see somebody like posting their shirt, a bloody shirt. This is how it starts, and then you've got like some words going back and forth as to who's doing what, which were a little weird. That exchange is a little weird. No, he's a liar, he's a coward, all this stuff, and you're like, what is going on? Then they're like, I've got it on tape, tease this tape. Now you're saying that they're not, this tape won't surface. I don't know. The whole thing is a little bit strange to me. And even the police report,
you think it's all fabricated?
Even the police thing that like Mark Romani went and very vague in detail. You're sort of like, what is going on with this whole thing? So,
are you saying that Bellator fabricated this entire thing?
I'm just saying, at this point, who knows?
Wow.
I mean, I just want to know, I would like, even if we don't get to actually see the tape, I'd like to just know how that tape even exists. Is it one of Brooks's guys who was just filming something randomly, and in that case, and if his guy's being jumped, why was he not? Why is he like standing there with his camera instead of
Or it could be a Pitbull guy if they come in as a team and they have a guy.
But it was Brooks who brought up the fact that this was on tape.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one that talked about it.
May have noticed
and he said, it will be shared. We will be sharing it later.
Yeah.
You promised that.
The truth is, they do have. I believe that they have genuine hatred towards each other. So I'm like, if you just look at it on that level, you're like, well, there's probably something happened. Like this whole thing. But I'm just saying that the way that this has been presented so far, it looks very weird.
I just want to also say, like, it's kind of Bellator's crazy, man.
Yes.
Because you have they're like Kimbo and Ken worked out a deal, or some variety of conspiracy there. And then you have after the fact Tito Ortiz being like, Liam McGarry sure felt slippery. And then now you have this. But this is before the fight, of course. But it's like, did these two conspire to make it? Like, there's like these always.
No one trusts them for some reason.
Well, there's a little bit of that, and also just Bellator courts a certain degree of.
They got Kurt Angle showing up at the next.
Yeah, and then there's Kurt Angle showing up at Dave and Buster's. Like, Bellator is it's a you know what? It is a true departure from the UFC for all things good and bad.
And sometimes that's a breath of fresh air.
Totally is a breath of fresh
But
air.
I will say that if they think that this kind of talk in our tiny, tiny bubble, like the real hardcore bubble, is going to increase ratings, I think if they put out a video and it goes viral and it ends up on non-MMA sites, then this could actually help them out. But this talk right here, or the chatter on Twitter about it all yesterday, that's not enough. Like, if they actually did this or tried to make this happen in order to bump the ratings up, this is not enough. The ratings will be the exact same had this not happened, in my opinion.
Yeah, sounds about right.
I haven't said that though. I want to see that fight.
Yeah, sure.
I would love to see that fight.
Yeah, that's what you. The silver lining here is that Friday, the 145 versus 155 champ, or we'll see what happens if they retain their titles. But those two guys, Bellator would be crazy not to make that fight now.
I'm super interested to see Will Brooks alone, because he has talked a lot. He's been very unhappy. He's been very critical. Even alluded to the fact that he wants out. There's a lot at stake for him, in my opinion, more so than anyone on that card. Because, you can make the case, given his record, and he's beaten some tough guys, this is a very solid fighter that feels like he's not getting, the respect and the love that he deserves from his promoter.
He's the best fighter on that card.
He needs to step up, though. He really does need to step up.
What do you mean?
Tomorrow, if he doesn't win, that's a huge blow.
Oh, he's gonna.
James Thompson's on that card too, don't
you? Well, the James Thompson.
Okay, one last thing before we go. It's a big weekend. It's a busy weekend once again in the world of MMA. UFC is back on Saturday. They're in Brazil. It's Vitor Belfort versus Dan Henderson 3.
I really enjoyed his interview on your show.
Well, thank you.
It was great.
It was one of my best. Thank you very much.
Are you open?
Yes, as always.
He was so forthcoming.
As always, yes. He's a big fan of the media. How do you guys feel about this fight? I'm having a hard time, and maybe to a degree it has to do with all that happened last week, but I'm able to separate my feelings, honestly. But I have a hard time wrapping my head, because it still brings up memories of the last few years and this era that we're trying to get over, and yet you have these two guys who are kind of the poster boys. One who handled it, I think, quite well, and Dan Henderson, who was always very forthright. Dan Henderson, in my opinion, handled his TRT use the way Vitor Belfort claims to handle or have handled his TRT use. But Dan was always very, open to talking about it and said all the right things, from my perspective. But how do we feel about this fight? The third fight going down in Brazil, of all places.
There's not a ton. I feel like there's not a ton of anticipation. There's not a ton of dread about it. It's not widely mocked. It's not widely anticipated. I think there is a little bit of. There is some interest, I think Henderson's had a bit of a rebound after a couple wins, but particularly the Boach win. And look, he didn't do so well against Weidman, but Vitor he touched up Weidman before everything went south. So, competitively, it makes a little bit of sense. The trilogy is split. So there's a lot to like, but on the same hand, it just feels like I'm ready to say goodbye to all that.
Yeah.
I'm ready for them to have their, I don't know, I'm saying this is their last fight, but I'm ready for that era of things to just be done. And I've always felt that the comparisons between, like, why doesn't Hendo get the scrutiny? I don't know, because Hendo doesn't rock 5 different haircuts at once, and his body hasn't changed.
He's also never failed a test.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely different. But
right.
Okay, and he didn't threaten John Morgan over a question with his 5 different haircuts. I like talking about his 5 different haircuts. But the point being, I felt like if you ever read Andrew Sullivan, he had this bit about sort of the Clinton-Bush dynamic, and without getting political about it, he was just ready to be like, I'm ready for a post-Clinton, post-Bush era together. And again, I don't want to malign them or compare them to them in that way, but I guess I'm ready to just pivot into a new era of UFC fights.
And this doesn't let us move on in a way because of who they are and where they're fighting as well. What do you think?
I think that bringing up the idea that we can see the exit door, I think that there are certain factors that make me okay with this fight. One of them is that we see the exit door. We don't see neither of these guys is moving in a direction that's going to be where the winner of this fight is not going to be in a position to challenge for a title. This is, or even be within position to fight somebody to then earn a spot at a championship. These guys are both hovering near the exit door, and maybe this is just two negatives adds up to a positive, but you've got two guys who have been using artificial means to sustain their careers, but at least it's two of them competing against each other. So I don't feel this is not Vitor, jacked up Vitor knocking out a rising Luke Rockhold with a kick that he wouldn't have been able to produce if he hadn't been using artificial means. This is two guys that so I'm okay with seeing these two guys that both of each of them has over their history had a pretty outstanding career. The career has been tainted, certainly in Vitor's case, in recent times. I wouldn't say Henderson's career has been tainted, but certainly there's an asterisk next to his TRT use. But two of them against each other, level playing field with the exit door right next to them. Go for it.
All right.
And it's not like they're adding new wrinkles to the game, at least not to their games. Like, these guys are getting older. But they got those. No. But they, the problem with the whole Dan Henderson, the problem with Dan Henderson, it's like we've been looking at Vitor Belfort, I think, a lot, or at least I have. I've been sort of commenting on Vitor Belfort, writing about him, his whole thing getting old, just the whole process of the Vitor Belfort thing getting old. In another way, though, it's uncomfortable with Dan Henderson as well. In some ways, the Tim Boetsch thing was, there's the old Hendo, but it was actually sort of this enabling agent to put this fight together, because all of a sudden you have him showing up in a 28-second fight, putting the brakes on somebody who fought him incautiously and just went in there and swung and got caught. It sort of subtracts the 5 previous fights where Dan Henderson was getting crushed in there, even though he caught Shogun Rua in the 3rd round and turned that fight around. But he's just not looked very good. It's sort of an uncomfortable position to see a guy like him put in there as well. And I know if you're going to have them fight, this would be the two guys maybe you put in there against each other. I see it making sense on that level, especially since they've sort of split the 2 previous fights. But it's uncomfortable from a lot of levels. And I think just Dan Henderson, it's, just the way he's fought, slowing down, just as reliant 100% on just landing that H-bomb and things like that. It's a weird fight. I'm not sure you're going to feel very good no matter what happens in this fight. You know what I'm saying?
I'll tell you what, if this fight goes 5 rounds, oh man, that's going to be pretty ugly after.
You won't wear a shirt like that next week if it goes 5 rounds? Is that a bet?
Yeah, I won't wear the shirt.
Not this specific shirt. Your trademark shirts.
Okay.
Yeah?
If it goes 5 rounds.
Wow.
All right.
I'm sorry I won't be here to see it.
What are you going to put up?
I won't be here to see it. I'm going to be in Australia. But I'll be watching.
Okay.
And it all culminates with that fight. But I will say Thomas Almeida's fighting on that card against Anthony Burchak. That's a fun fight.
Gilbert Burns, Rashid Magomedov.
Yeah, so there's some really good fighters, and I'm all in on Patrick Cummins versus Glover Teixeira. I wonder if it's too soon for Durkin, but this is a big opportunity for him.
He doesn't think so.
He doesn't think so, but he was the butt of many jokes, unrightfully so in my opinion, and he can step up in a big way. I hope you watched that Phil Davis fight against Glover many times leading up to this one, and then like I said on Friday, some great young fighters as well. So it's a good weekend of MMA. As I mentioned, I am off next week due to UFC 193 coverage in Melbourne, Australia, but the good news is these guys will be pulling their weight.
Well, we'll be here. I don't know if we're pulling our weight exactly.
Well, you'll be doing a show, and that's awesome. I think it will be like 4 a.m. locally over there when you're doing this live, but I will wake up just to watch you guys live.
Hey, all right, that's
I'll be one of your 5 live viewers next Thursday. So thank you so much for watching this week's episode of The Beat. We are back next week. We're trying to keep this going. We're trying to make this a weekly thing. We will do that next week as well. For now, we say goodbye. That is Luke. That is Jeff. That is Chuck. I am Ariel. Thank you again for watching. We'll talk to you next week.